I'm Pat Torres. Welcome to The Story and welcome to Friday. We're kicking things off tonight with a look at the continued crumbling of the small newspaper landscape in Oregon. There's just no way to sugarcoat it. Things are not good. And whether you live in a big or small community, it's going to affect you. And that's our big story tonight. Sad to say, but some big changes are on the way for Oregon's news landscape. This week, we learned that 2 major local news companies are being sold. Journalists have been laid off, and 5 newspapers are eliminating their print editions. On Monday, Pamplin Media announced that they were sold to a company out of Mississippi called Carpenter Media Group. Pamplin-owned newspapers serve communities across the state. They include the Portland Tribune, Beaverton Valley Times, the Hillsborough Tribune, the Gresham Outlook, the Newburgh Graphic, and the Madras Pioneer. Most of them published once or twice a week. And according to Pamplin Media, they brought the news to more than 1 million readers every week. The combined staff is 200. The company was owned for 25 years by Robert Pamplin Jr., but he says he decided to sell because of age and health reasons. He's 82 years old. Carpenter Media says they intend to serve communities with excellent local journalism. Then, just hours after that announcement, on Monday, we learned another big Oregon media company was going up for sale. EO Media owns 12 newspapers across the state. They include the Bend Bulletin, the East Oregonian, the Astorian, and others. They had actually expanded some of those papers in the last few years. We did a big profile last year on the Rogue Valley Times in Medford. At the time, things actually seemed pretty optimistic. 6 months after opening, they had expanded their staff, worked hard on some big investigations, and doubled the size of their paper.
This is one of the marquee intersections in downtown Medford. And as we were outgrowing our first office, which is 3 blocks from here, it was really important to us to stay in the heart of downtown. You can like literally feel how much heavier and bigger the paper is between these two.
But that was then. Now, a year later, things are changing. The Rogue Valley Times is going from 3 print editions a week down to 2. Other papers are also reducing their print editions. Some will not be printing at all. They're going to be all online. Some papers will be consolidated. EO Media says all print subscribers of 5 smaller newspapers in Eastern Oregon will now only get the East Oregonian, which will now be the lone paper for all of Northeast Oregon. 28 employees across the state were already laid off on Monday, and next month another 19 will have their hours reduced, we're told. And the company is now looking for a new owner. EO Media says postal rates have climbed, healthcare costs are soaring, and the ad money has fallen. That's a bad combo. Local news outlets across the country are facing the same problem. So, what to do about it? Today we talked with a nonprofit organization working on some solutions. Rebuild Local News works on developing public policies to try and save local news organizations across the country. When we've talked about smaller news shops closing down, we've often said, hey, support them, go subscribe to your local paper. According to the president, Steve Waldman, that is only a start.
Newspapers in other parts of the country that have cut back on their reporting staffs and then asked people to subscribe are essentially asking people to pay more for a worse product. And that's not going to work either, So I think news organizations need to invest in the publications to make them better cover the community. And then, the community should subscribe to it. There are other ways of supporting local news in addition to subscribing. You can donate to nonprofit local news organizations, and even for-profit news organizations are increasingly setting up philanthropic divisions. And you can, if you're a small business, advertise in local news. You can also support public policy in the state.
All right, well, so what does that mean, that public policy thing? Let's take a look. There's been some effort on that front in the past few years, but mostly it's not taken off. Here in Oregon in 2023, the legislative session, a bill would have paid for grants for local news. It would have also established a work group on the state of local journalism with policy recommendations. An early draft of the bill also would have provided a state tax credit for donating or subscribing to local news. Unfortunately, the bill died in committee, but Waldman says those kinds of efforts actually can work.
Illinois and New York just passed something that is very promising. It's a refundable tax credit. Really, it's a subsidy for newsrooms that retain local reporters or hire local reporters. The Illinois bill actually had a bigger tax credit for hiring and expanding local reporting staff. So that creates a good set of incentives. You get more if you're expanding your coverage of your community, you get less if you're contracting it. Another idea is tax credits or grants to small businesses that advertise in local news. It's a really interesting bank shot that is supporting both sides of the economic, kind of contract that supports local news. You're helping small businesses, restaurants and grocery stores, but you're also helping local media.
That is an interesting idea. Another option gaining momentum, nonprofit news organizations.
Unlike a newspaper that's owned by a big chain, they don't have to generate 20% profit. They just have to break even and serve the community. So that makes it easier right from the start. And the other thing they have going for them is that they can supplement the traditional revenue streams of advertising and subscriptions or donations with philanthropy, with grants from foundations or donations from philanthropists. And that is often enough to put it over the top if you're running it as a well-run business.
A bunch of interesting ideas there. And now we want to hear from you. How do you feel about the state of local news? Do you subscribe to your local paper? I subscribe to 3. Are you willing to support policy changes or donate to nonprofit news outlets? Send us your thoughts, will you? The address is thesstory@kgw.com or call and leave us a voicemail. The number is 503-226-5090. Now let's talk about health and behavioral health in Oregon and a lawsuit from 4 major hospital systems against the Oregon Health Authority. The systems are Legacy, Providence, Peace Health, and St. Charles. The suit was on, then it was off, but now it's back on again, revived by a federal appeals court. The hospital sued, arguing that civil commitment patients with mental health holds are forced to wait too long in their secure hospital rooms. Now, those are people deemed to be a danger to themselves or others. The hospitals say the problem is not enough space at the state hospital where those patients should be going. Without that space, though, the patients can't move on and they're stuck at the hospital. The hospital systems say that's a problem because their hospitals are not designed to treat that population for extended periods. We've explained this civil commitment controversy at length in our Uncommitted series. The number of civil commitment patients at the state hospital is incredibly low nowadays, down to single digits at times. There's just not enough room for them. It's because of a different federal court ruling that requires the state hospital to admit aid and assist patients who are facing criminal charges within just 7 days. Those patients have been found mentally unfit to understand the charges against them. So the state hospital is basically full of the criminal patients, leaving few, if any, beds for the civil commitment patients. That leaves the private hospital systems to care for the civil folks, which is to say that they say is not right. The hospitals want the state to spend more money to increase the number of civil commitment beds at the state hospital. But the state argues, hold on. You hospitals have basically signed up for this because they voluntarily apply for something called an acute care certification every 2 years. That certification lets them care for those civil commitment patients. The state said they do that, quote, because there's a business advantage to doing so. And now the state argues the hospitals want to get rid of those civil commitment patients in order to open up beds for regular patients and in turn make more money. So the hospital system scored a win with the lawsuit being brought back, and now it's back with the district court. The next step is the judge deciding whether or not the hospital systems can speak on behalf of those civilly committed patients who are in their care. It's a complicated legal question. We'll keep you posted on how this all plays out. Elsewhere, Multnomah County just passed a nearly $4 billion budget, with a good portion of it focused on increasing homelessness and behavioral health services. The budget earmarks hundreds of thousands of dollars for tents and tarps, as well as other harm reduction supplies. And as our Blair Best reports, some elected leaders are calling those investments a step in the wrong direction.
Tucked behind rose bushes in Portland's Central East Side, Teresa passes time.
On the streets in general, all my life.
mostly staying in tents like these.
Where do I get my tents? I've gotten 2 from outreaches, and the others I've acquired or purchased myself.
It's helpful, it just keeps us out of the rain and stuff.
Tents are a lifeline for many. That's not going away anytime soon. Because on Thursday, Multnomah County passed a nearly $4 billion budget, much of the money meant for homelessness and behavioral health services, including about $200,000 for more than 6,000 tents, and more than $500,000 for 5 million clean syringes for what's considered harm reduction efforts.
The county continues down a path of enablement that is really, really problematic.
Last week, and in a letter to the county chair, Portland City Commissioner Rene Gonzalez raised his concerns over this portion of the budget, but nothing changed.
In this area, the county has not been responsive to the city. We are spending a fortune on tent and tarp cleanup. So for the county and for some of these nonprofits to continue to be pumping them into our community is a real problem.
Some Multnomah County commissioners are also questioning the move to send more tents to the streets.
I would have preferred that we'd had a much bigger push towards more shelter, because that is going to be the most important thing to get people off the streets.
People like Lisa, who's trying to do just that.
Why not just build more tiny homes? Why not get people inside? If they're going to make it illegal to camp, why the hell would they give out more tents?
I'm sad, bit outraged, but not surprised about the budget that passed.
County Commissioner Sharon Myron, the only one to vote against the budget.
We're just investing more and more money in the same old strategies, and it's clearly not working.
Yet the one behind much of these decisions, County Chair Jessica Vega Peterson, had a noticeably more positive tone on Friday.
But I think ultimately we ended up with a budget that is setting us up for the important work that we have to do as a county government going forward. And I think we have some folks who were never really going to support the budget, no matter what was in it. And that's unfortunate, because there was a lot of hard work that went into putting this together.
Anybody who's high up there, like in the commissioner or whoever the people are that make these rules, they should be homeless for 2 months and just see how it feels to be like us, because it sucks.
Okay, Blair, so what good came out of the budget? Was there anything that commissioners were pleased with?
Well, yes, and let's keep in mind that the money spent for these harm reduction supplies is just a very small fraction of the overall budget, even though it is clearly drawing some attention. Again, the budget is nearly $4 billion. Some other top spending points is millions going towards opening more shelter beds, funding the downtown Portland Behavioral Health Day Center, funding that 24/7 sobering center, and funding a plan to get half of everyone living on the streets into housing by the end of next year. So big goals. But again, and as you saw, some believe that it's not a question of whether there's enough money, but rather if it's being spent in the right places. And speaking of that, today, Commissioner Julia Brim Edwards, despite voting yes for this budget, felt that not all of the money was being spent in the most productive of ways. Take a listen.
And yet this budget had money in it for things like public financing of county commission campaigns. It had money for enforcing the city's leaf blower ordinance, and it also funded other things that would be like meetings and conferences. It funded $2 million in the chief operating officer's office, a brand new very high level, highly paid positions that from my perspective, there may be a valid reason for it, but in terms of the priority for the county and what we have to get after, that our community knows we need to get after, I felt like misplaced priorities.
Okay, we should pay attention to what she has to say. But what about accountability, Blair? That's something that many people have been very skeptical of the county of before when it comes to money that's being spent here.
When talking with the chair today, she said that was a top priority for her, and that she is currently working with the Joint Office and the 80 groups that actually purchase the tents to give to homeless people to come up with a tracking system. It's not explicitly in the budget right now, but she's currently working with them, and she says she's expecting some answers in a couple of weeks. Pat.
It is amazing that they do not track where all that goes. All right, we heard from Rene Gonzalez, who's running for Portland mayor. What did the other mayoral candidates have to say?
So we reached out to all the top candidates. We did not hear back from Commissioner Mingus Mapps, but we did hear back from Commissioner Carmen Rubio, who said in part, quote, harm reduction is an important, necessary strategy that saves lives, but it must be adaptable to current challenges. In a world in which we are still building out our shelter system, tent bans will only push homeless community members into parks, doorways of small businesses, and under our bridges. This is not a solution nor humane. We also heard from mayoral candidate Keith Wilson. He founded a trucking company and a homeless nonprofit, and he had stronger words to share, saying in part, quote, handing out tents and tarps and sleeping bags is misguided waste masquerading as compassion that will only serve to perpetuate more suffering. The unsheltered homelessness, mental illness, and addiction we see on our streets isn't normal or acceptable.
So kind of a wide range there from the mayoral candidates. All right, Blair, thank you. Appreciate you bringing this to us. So what's going through your mind? Anytime we talk about handing out tents or drug supplies, we certainly hear from a lot of you, and we love that. Let us know what you think. The email is thestory@kgw.com, or call and leave a voicemail, 503-226-5090. Up next on The Story, we talk a lot about the homeless crisis and housing production, but what does the rental market look like in Multnomah County? We're going to take a look at the average rental price and how it compares around the nation, and we'll check in on what's happening with eviction cases when The Story returns. Let's talk about housing in Multnomah County, not the front end of the line like housing production, but the middle and the back end, rent prices and eviction. The latest rent report from Apartment List finds the overall median rent in the city of Portland comes to $1,566, about $1,400 for a one-bedroom apartment, nearly $1,700 for a two-bedroom. That puts the Rose City at number 40 among the nation's largest 100 cities. For the sake of comparison, number one is Irvine, California at nearly $3,000 a month. Closer to our region, Seattle is 16th with a median of about $2,000 a month. And Spokane, Washington, 81st at close to $1,200. Across the country, the average is right around $1,400. Looking over the past 12 months here at home, rent growth is actually down 1.7%. So 1.7% compared to May of 2023. At the same time, Data from Evicted in Oregon shows an increase in the number of eviction cases over the last year in Multnomah County. The latest data that we have to compare from last year is from April. So April 2023, there were nearly 500, so 475 eviction cases filed in court. Fast forward to April of this year, there were 874 cases filed. Go back a month in March of this year, nearly 1,000. Also worth noting, that's close to half of all the cases filed in Oregon Circuit Court that month, which makes sense as Multnomah County is the state's most populous county. By that same data, more than a half of the landlords in the county, 56%, are represented by a lawyer. A wide majority are represented by someone, be it a lawyer or some other kind of legal agent. And you compare that to only 9% of tenants in the county. That is part of what researchers at Portland State University looked into back in 2022 and 23. In a report published earlier this year, they talked to 68 Multnomah County tenants in a series of focus groups. Each person had received an eviction notice, so a relatively small sample size, but worth looking at the data. And while their focus wasn't specifically about a rise in rent, Natalie Chichula with Portland State says it definitely did come up.
In our report, we do talk about one mother in particular who mentions that her eviction really came from a rental increase. She wasn't able to meet the new rent increase, and it resulted in these long-term, almost like cascading consequences. You know, like she had to get multiple jobs. She had to find accommodations for her kids because she couldn't find somewhere where everybody could stay in one place. And then again, there are other tenants who mentioned that it was the rent increase that really led to the eviction notice that they received.
And with that eviction notice, researchers say tenants developed a lot of symptoms like anxiety, depression, and sought medical assistance. What many did not seek in PSU's study was any of the eviction support services that are available, things like rent payment assistance or legal representation. Fewer than half, in fact, just 29 of the 68 people tried to get help. Some within that group asked for resources, but then were not connected to any services. So ultimately, only a quarter of the tenants who tried to get help actually got any.
Yeah, I think as our report shows, it's really difficult for the tenants to access these forms of support. And some of it is, like the tenants will reach out to these organizations and the organizations don't contact them back. I think the other thing though is that tenants also, it's really difficult to, I think to be in the middle of an eviction and worry about the possibility of having to be displaced, and then while also trying to look for resources. And so I think it just puts tenants in a really difficult position to have to do multiple things at once. Again,
she says add things in like language barriers, discrimination, and an overall lack of resources by the groups trying to help tenants. And you have a real system where people are not aware of the ways they can fight an eviction notice. And so more than half of those in the focus group said they vacated their home to avoid trouble with the legal system or their landlord. Cholula told us that from the outset, their goal with this research is to find avenues to end homelessness. So with their report, the researchers made some recommendations, creating programs that reach out to tenants before they make a desperate decision. A rent relief program in Texas claimed success by sending out mailers to low-income households statewide that were translated into multiple languages. Other recommendations include create eviction navigation programs where tenants seeking help can talk to a real person. Also establish a tenant right to counsel to guarantee legal representation for tenants facing eviction. Now, that last idea, by the way, was rejected by Multnomah County voters last year through a ballot measure. Measure 26238 would have levied a 0.75 capital gains tax to pay lawyers to represent tenants facing eviction. That was roundly rejected by voters, with just over 80% of the county voters saying, no, thank you. So if a tenant's right to counsel is seen as a way to help, clearly yet another tax in Multnomah County is not the way to pay for it. But the issue does remain. Multnomah County has the highest rate of renter-occupied housing in the state at about 46%, and the most eviction cases across Oregon. Couple that with the reported health impacts of going through an eviction that researchers found, and the PSU team makes the case that increasing funding to emergency programs like rental assistance is actually a public health investment. What do you think about that approach? I know a few of you watching are landlords. Share your thoughts with us, will you? Email us, the address again, thestory@kgw.com, or call and leave a voicemail, 503-226-5090. Keep it right here. We're coming back right after this. Hey, that's the end of our show. Thanks for watching. Doesn't matter if you watch live or later on YouTube, you're all part of the Story family. And remember, the story, our collective story, never ends. Timbers 360 is coming your way next. Enjoy the sunny weekend ahead, and I'll see you right back here Monday night at 6:30.